So when we are creating a Docker volumes, these Docker volumes will be added as a part of the pod, and pod is created inside the deployment object. So let us try to understand first how we can create the deployment object. So I'll create one YAML file, deployment.yaml file. In this one, we'll start adding the deployment object related syntax. For creating any kind of object in a Kubernetes, we need to specify API version. This is very important to be specified, because it defines that which API versions we will be using for creating a deployment objects. And for any kind of object that we create, you can find a latest version or any previous versions. If you go to the kubernetes.io and in the reference guide, if you go there, you should be able to get the detail about that. So let us first specify API version. And in case of creating a deployment object, it should be apps.app/v1. This is the first line we need to specify. Now the next line that we need is the kind. There are many different kind of objects Kubernetes support, like service object, like persistent volume claim, deployment objects, and many other. In our case, we want to create the objects deployment, so we will specify deployment here, and you need to follow the specific syntax where D has to be capital. That is the next line we need to specify. With the kind, we are telling Kubernetes that I want to create a deployment object. Now the next line that we need to specify is the metadata. The metadata is telling some information about the objects that we are creating. We can specify a name of the object we want to create with a metadata. In this case, at the same line where we are specifying the kind and API version, we need to add metadata. Okay, and inside that one, we are going to provide indented 2-line name, and in our case, we are creating a config server. So we will give the name config server deployment. This is the one line that we need to provide, and we are giving our deployment a specific name. Then we can specify labels. These labels are very important to be specified, and it is possible that you can provide the multiple labels inside the metadata. In our case, we will give the name same as config server deployment. So these objects will be referred anywhere where we are referring the deployment object. For example, when we will be creating a service object where we need to specify which deployment, so we can specify the name label with these, and we should be able to use that. And there are multiple labels I can specify. If I want to provide more labels, like the test app, and I need to give some more labels, test server deployment, then I can definitely specify. And wherever we want to specify, wherever we want to use that, with help of these label, we can tell Kubernetes that deploy objects with this label in the Kubernetes. So this is all like with very powerful concept of the label available in the Kubernetes. So we don't need a test app here, so we will remove that. The next thing that we need to specify in the deployment object is a spec. The spec is core of the deployment objects. This is where we will specify all the detail regarding the deployment, kind of a deployment we will be creating here. So here in the spec, we will be specifying the details like volumes. We will be specifying details regarding the image, which image to be used, support details to be used, and environment detail to be used. All the details regarding the deployment, how we will run the pod, all those details that we can specify inside the specs. So that is very important to be specified. So all the details that we will specify now is going to be inside the specification. So we indent with two more line here, and the first thing that we specify here is how many replicas we want to uh, uh, run. In this case, we want only one replica, but you can specify 1, 2, 3, or even 0 as well. As many replica you want to create for these deployment objects, you can specify right here. Next thing is coming as a selectors, but let us come to selector later, because in the selector whatever we are specifying, that is going to be part of whatever we are adding after that, and those details will be added as a part of the selector. So let us try to understand next part, and we will come to selector later. Now the next thing that we need to add is a template. We will come to the selector later. So let us try to add template. This template here, okay, I just added. Inside this we indent two more spaces here, and then we add some metadata about the template that we are creating. Here we will specify label, and this label, again like this label, we can add as many key value pair as we want, and using these labels the selector will be able to decide which pod to be run. So here let's say I want to create the key as a app and value as config server. I can also add as many label as I want, but I will restrict with one. And now let us go back to the selector. If you here there are multiple way to select which configuration I want to run. In this case I will say okay, match labels with the app configuration, and when we are telling that okay, app configurations with matching the label whichever is specified below the selector inside the template. And now what Kubernetes will do is Kubernetes will search for these key value pair inside the template and try to pick up that for generating the pod. So anything we discussed before this is all about how the deployment object will be created, all the details regarding the metadata, and some which configurations to be run, and the label details. Now the next thing that we specify inside the template is mainly related to the container that we want to create, the container or the pod that we want to create. Here first thing that we need to specify here is again a same level of indent as the metadata is spec. This spec is different from whatever the spec is provided here. I know it is little bit confusing here, but this is how the syntax is created for the Kubernetes. Inside this one we also create the containers. These containers will have all the details that we need about the pod that we are creating. The first thing that we need to add inside is the container detail, and here also we can have multiple container that we can create. We can have container 1, we can have container 2, and inside this one we can specify all the details about the image and everything. But in our case we just want to generate only one pod. That is why we will add only, in the list we will add only one container details. So here the first thing that we need to specify which image that we want to use for creating the pod. In our case we want to use, and mind you, you have to add this image into the registry. This registry can be the private registry or it can be a public registry. A private registry may be the the ECR, or the public registry may be the Docker Hub or something that we can specify. Here the next thing that we want to specify is pull policy. The pulls policy that specify that how you want to, when you are restarting the pod, how you want to restart. For example, there are multiple things like always pull that image, or you also want to specify something like if not present, if not present, or never, or there are multiple policies available that you can specify, and you can get more detail about that in the official document as well. So in our case we want to use, always we want to pull the newer image whichever is available with the version v1. Okay, so these details is provided. Another thing that we provide is ports. Which port, the internal port or the external port that we want to use. In our case we want to use container port, and here we specify the port that we have, we want to run this applications. If you look here in application your .yaml, we have specified this port here, right? So we can specify the port detail here. Okay. The next thing that we want to specify is environment details that we want to use for running this pod. If you look at application.yamls, I have got a multiple configurations being added. So I want to use the same configurations here. Some of the configurations may be same, or if it is the same we can also skip that, but still I will add this. In this case I want to change the search locations, because this is the class path config, and when we run the pod we cannot use the class path configurations. We have to specify a name little bit differently. So thank you for watching this video. In the next video we will continue adding more details about the environment and further creating the service object. So please do watch the next video. Thank you.